We are in Daf Yud Gimel today, 13, and we are in Yud Beis Amud Beis, the third to last narrow line. Tana Rabbana, Sha'ar Rishona Machaludim, the first hour of the day, just at sunrise, who has their meal? Those are the Ludim. Ludim were people that were cannibals. They were difficult and uncivilized, and they would eat a meal just as they woke up, just as the day started. Shnia Machalistin, the eating of food, eating breakfast, eating a meal, not breakfast, we'll see soon, eating a meal at 2 hours into the day, the second hour of the day, that would be thieves, bandits who were awake during the night, and they're rushing out to be in hiding, and so they would eat their meal the second hour. Shlishis, the third hour, Michael Yershin, people who don't have to work, who inherited their wealth, and so they'll have a meal already at the third hour of the day. Revius Machal Pa'alim. In this version, the Gemara says that the fourth hour of the day, laborers will take a break for a meal. Chamishis Machal Tamid Chachamim. The fifth hour is the time that Talmid Chachamim would eat. And Shishis, the sixth hour, Machal Kalala, is a time that everybody will eat. So the Gemara says, wait, V'amar Papa Ravi is Man Sudal Kol, but we just said in regards to the in regards to chametz, the reason why you can eat chametz until the end of the fourth hour of the day, because that's when most people have their meals. And if most people have their meals, their body will remember the time, and therefore they'll remember that it has stopped eating chametz. So how can you say that most people eat at noon, at the beginning of the sixth hour, an hour before noon? Ela ima epach. So rather we have to switch it around. Revius machal kalala. On the fourth hour is when most people eat. Chamish is machal pa'alim, but people that are laborers, so they don't get to eat. They're working, and they will only get to eat in the fifth hour. And shish is machal tamid chachamim. And the sixth hour of the day is when the tamid chachamim will eat. And mikan ve'elech, the statement continues in the Braisa and says from there on, anybody that eats after that, kizurek even lechemas. It's like throwing a stone, a pebble, into a jug, into a canteen. It's going to break it. In other words, having fasted half a day, it's not going to be easy for the digestive system, and you have to take it slow. And you have to be careful with what you eat. Amar Abaye. Abaye said, but that's only if you didn't eat anything in the morning. But if you tasted something, you ate something in the morning, then it's not a concern. This does have practical applications, because generally we say one should not eat or drink before davening. And then we also, so if somebody has davening, Yantif or Shabbos, sometimes it can go long. And so it's important to eat something in the morning, taste something in the morning, if you're not going to have a proper breakfast until lunchtime. Amar Rav Ashi, k'machlekes beidos kach machlekes b'chametz. Rav Ashi says in regards to the disagreement about the times, that Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda said in regards to witnesses, that people will make less of a mistake of recognizing the time than somebody would in regards to than Rabbi Yehuda holds. So too in regards to chametz, the machlekes is the same there and here. So the Gemara says, Pshita, hainahach. Of course, it's exactly the same. That's what we said. To tell you that all the responses, all the answers we had in responding that chametz, that the distinction, that the reason why they was stricter in regards to chametz, and said that you needed more time. The answer we gave, that because chametz masal hakol, chametz is given over to everybody, meaning that not only witnesses who are being diligent and trying to tell the time, but other people who are not so typically don't know what time it is and won't necessarily know how to interpret the sun. Nevertheless, they have to know the halachas of chametz. They also have to get rid of the chametz. It's given over to everybody, and therefore this halacha applies to everybody. And so the responses that we saw that in chametz was stricter is a proper response. It's not just a dichui, not just trying to push away the question, but it's actually a correct halachic response. And don't say that it is machlokes how Rabbi Yehuda came to this, or what Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is, or what Rabbi Meir's opinion is. No, and as we said, that the Mishnah here and in regards to witnesses concur, and the answer for the distinctions is because chametz is masal hakol. Amar Rav Simi bar Ashi lo shana le b'shois. However, it's important to know that this is only true that witnesses that make a mistake. It's only if they tell us hours, the second hour of the day, third hour of the day, and so on. But if one said, "Oh, I witnessed this and it happened prior to sunrise," and the other person says it's after sunrise, and that's a very distinct moment or a distinct time, you can then edusa matela. That even if it's more. We said a person can make a mistake within a half hour, or 2 hours, whatever version we had before, and here it's much closer than that. But nevertheless, since it's before sunrise to after sunrise, that's going to be enough of a contradiction and invalidate their testimony. Pshita, that seems quite obvious, because you can tell that it's so different. But what the meaning is, even if one said it was before sunrise and one said it's at sunrise, nevertheless, the testimony is going to be the testimony is going to be invalid. And where it says Hanami Pshita, that too is very distinct, because sunrise you can already see the sun at the horizon, even just the glimmer of one edge of the sun at the horizon, but you can see the sun at the horizon, and that should be sufficient. Pshita. So Mao the Tema Tarvai Chadamil Sakami. Because I could have said that really they're both saying the same exact thing. However, now we go to 13a, Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. The one that said it happened at exactly at Netzachama, it's because he saw a glare, a shine, and it was still before sunrise, but he thought he saw the sun at the horizon, but it wasn't that. It was really just some shine off of something, and so maybe we can interpret it as a mistake. Yeah, but we're not going to interpret something as a mistake in order to accept a testimony of in a capital crime. And we can't put somebody to death based on us reinterpreting the testimony of the witness. So since he said it was at sunrise, that contradicts the testimony that was before sunrise and invalidates the testimony. Kamash Malan. And that's what he was saying to us, that only in hours where people looking at the sun could make a mistake, but not in before or after or during Hanetzacham, sunrise. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav halacha Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Nachman said in the name of Rav that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, that you have to stop eating chametz at the fourth hour. The fifth hour is tolin, is in between, so you can still give chametz to your animals, but you yourself are not allowed to eat anymore. And then at the beginning of the 6th hour is when you have to burn it. So Rava said to Rabbi Meir, why do you say that the halach is like? Why are you saying that the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda? Why didn't you say the halach is like Rabbi Meir? Because, and the reason we would say that is the sasam lantana kavase, because we have a Mishnah later where the Mishnah is unattributed and seems to be going with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. The Tanan, as we learned, Kol shah muter lechol machin. It says at the time that you're allowed to eat chametz yourself, you're also allowed to give chametz to your animals, right? And since it says that the time you're allowed to eat chametz yourself, you're allowed to give it to the animals. That means, and we saw that Rabbi Yehuda only said that you're not allowed to eat it yourself, but you're still allowed to give it to your animals, and that's why it's tolan. In between, you have this in between hour, and that seems to be saying that there is no in-between hour. You can eat chametz as long as your animal can eat chametz. Your animal can eat chametz as long as you can eat chametz. And that means up to the time where you have to burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. So we have a Mishnah that's unattributed and is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, in concurrence with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And the Sasam Lantana and the Mishnah unattributed seems to be going with that. So that seems to be the halacha. Where it says actually it's the other way around. Hahi lav stama. That is not a good proof, because it is not in accordance with Rabbi Meir. Mishum dekashem muter, because the Gemara there analyzed the Mishnah and said, why did it say kol sha'ashem muter lecho at all, the entire hour or the time that you're allowed to eat? I should say at the time that you're eating chametz, then you can give chametz to your animals. Why does it say that you're allowed to eat? The Gemara there explained that actually it's not referring to that you yourself are allowed to eat. At the time that chametz is permissible to be eaten, and that means when a kohen is allowed to eat chametz of teruma, which you're not allowed to burn, and that's Rabbi Shimon Gamliel at the end of the Mishnah, which said that even though that this was in reference to kohen and teruma, that a regular person and mundane food, typical food, so that you're allowed to only eat for the first 4 hours of the day, and then you have to stop eating it in order to separate from eating chametz 2 hours before the prohibition time. The kohen, nevertheless, because it's teruma, and teruma you're not allowed to destroy, you're not allowed to burn it if it's kosher to be eaten. And over here you're burning it an hour earlier as a fence. You shouldn't do that. So the kohen continues to eat. So as long as it's permissible to eat, meaning that the kohen can eat, that's when the regular food, non-teruma, are allowed to still be given to the animals. So in fact, that's not in concurrence with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, but rather this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, so well, if that's the case, why did Rav Nachman say the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda? Say the halach is like Rabbi Gamliel, who adds this point of that even though that for most people, for typical food, the halacha is indeed that at the end of the 4th hour you have to stop eating. But in regards to teruma, a kohen has an additional hour. So say that the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel. And why should we say that that's the halacha? The havale machriya. And this is a general rule that when we have a machlokas, one opinion says it says strict, one is lenient, and then there's one who is a machriya, who comes in between and says, well, actually, a little bit like this opinion and a little bit like that opinion, and toes a midway line. That the halacha is like the machriya, the halacha is like the midway. So too over here. Why don't you say the midway? Well, actually, Rabbi Gamliel is not a machriya, was not deciding between the two, or going between the two opinions. Because he was including something that was not mentioned before. It's a new idea, his own opinion. Meaning, earlier, Rabbi Yehuda said everybody has to stop eating at the end of the 4th hour. Had Rabbi Yehuda said both mundane, typical food and kachim, teruma, or food, you must stop eating at the fourth hour, at the end of the fourth hour. And Rabbi Meir says, no, both regular food and teruma must be stopped. It can be eaten to the end of the fifth hour. So then you can say, look, they were both talking about regular food and kachim food, and one said to stop at 4, one said to stop at 5, and Rabbi Gamliel's coming in and he's making a compromise here. He says, well, for teruma we'll go like Rabbi Meir to the end of the fifth hour, and for regular food we're going to be strict like Rabbi Yehuda to fourth hour. So then you can say he's a machriya. He came in with a compromise, and the halacha is going to be that way. However, that's not what happened, because neither of them had mentioned anything in regards to teruma. They just said you have to stop eating at the fourth hour, or you have to stop eating at the fifth hour. We don't know what halacha what they would say about teruma. That's a new introduction of idea of a concept or a question that neither of them had talked about. So Rabbi Gamliel is just bringing in a new idea. So that's not a compromise. He's just adding a component that wasn't there beforehand in the conversation, and therefore the halacha is not. We're not going to say as a rule the halacha is like the machriya, the one who brings a compromise, and therefore he didn't say the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel. V'iba yisema. Or we can say Rav Dama Kahaitana. That Rav says like this teaching. The time we learned Abba Asa Shachali is b'Shabbos Mevarin es Hakol Mefnei Shabbos. When the 14th day is on Shabbos, so typically the morning before of the 14th day, you wake up, you have your last bit of chametz, and then you collect it and you burn it. You destroy the chametz. That's the halacha. And now, but obviously on Shabbos you can't do that. So everything you would do on the 14th, you do on the 13th. That means the 13th at night, you check for chametz, even though that you're still going to be eating chametz way into to the end of the 13th and into the 14th. Nevertheless, you check for chametz on the 13th at night, and the 13th in the morning, you're going to burn the chametz and say the nullification. And yet, that night you're going to have a Shabbos meal, and the next morning you're going to have a Shabbos meal. But you go through the process the same way you would on an Erev Pesach. You do it on that Erev Shabbos on the 13th. V'sarfin teruma is tameas. And then that Mishnah says that, that Brisa says that, in fact, not only do we burn the chametz, but even teruma, which technically you can continue eating for the next day. And as we said, you're not allowed to destroy teruma. You're not allowed to burn teruma without any. You're not allowed to burn teruma without any for no reason, because it's still edible. It's a mitzvah to have. Yet on that Erev Shabbos, you're going to burn teruma, whether it's tameos, whether the teruma is already tamei, teluyos, whether it's in a doubt of whether or not it became tamei. Utaharas, and even if it is tahar, if it is edible and good and still kosher teruma, nevertheless you're going to burn it. However, mishayrim min teruma mazin shtei sudas. You do leave for each person 2 meals worth of teruma, that for everybody that can eat the teruma. So this way, as much of it will be consumed on Shabbos. Kedei lechel ad dalat, enough to eat for 4 hours into the day of Shabbos morning. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yehuda ish bar Tusa. This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yehuda from the place called Bar Tusa. Sha'amar Masham Rabbi Yeshua, as he taught it in the name of Rabbi Yeshua. Amrla, and they argued with Rabbi Eliezer ben Yehuda, and they said to him, "Taharas la yisrafu." Yeah, you shouldn't burn the pure teruma, because that's still kosher. Maybe somebody's going to show up that's still hungry, and you're going to find somebody that can eat it. Maybe a Kohen will show up. They thought about that already, and they tried, and they figured out it's the last moments before Pesach, and this is the teruma that's chametz that they have. If they would have found a Kohen to give it to, they would have given it already. So they're saving, for each Kohen, they know they're saving 2 meals worth, which is Friday night meal and Shabbos day's meal, and that's it. And the rest of it they have to get rid of, because otherwise it's going to be left over, and they're going to have chametz on Pesach. Maybe you don't know of somebody who's outside of the city and was there for Shabbos, and they're coming in Shabbos morning. They're going to have a meal. So he said, okay, based on that, why don't you also say that even the teruma that has a doubt whether it's tummy or not, let's not burn that, because maybe somebody's going to, maybe Eliyahu Hanavi is going to come and show up and tell us that since it's in doubt, maybe he'll show up and tell us that it never became tummy. We're not sure if it became tummy. Eliyahu Hanavi is going to come and tell us that it doesn't become tummy. But meaning he's saying we can't take into account things that are not certain going to happen and not likely to happen, because otherwise you're going to be left with chametz. So even though that there's a prohibition of destroying teruma that is edible and good, but nevertheless, this is the last moments that you can do so. You're saving whatever you think you're going to consume, you and whoever else is going to consume into Shabbos, and the rest you have to get rid of together with the rest of the chametz. Amrullah, they said to him, no, you can't ask me a question about Eliyahu coming, because kvar muftach lehen Yisrael, it is already established a promise to Yisrael, she'ein Eliyahu ba, Eliyahu Navi, who's going to come days before Mashiach to tell us about the coming times. So Eliyahu Navi is going to come. So we already know he's not going to come Lib Erev Shabbos, not on Fridays before Shabbos, Lib Erev Yom Tovim, and not on Erev Yontif. Why? Because if he does come, everybody's going to get into a frenzy and stop preparing for Shabbos. So the need to prepare for Shabbos and Yontif is so great that Eliyahu Navi will not come on a Friday or on Erev Yontif. So great. So in this Erev Yontif, in preparation for this Erev Shabbos, there's no, Eliyahu is never going to come and tell us that this question, this teruma that's in question, whether it became tummy or not, to tell us that it's okay. However, the argument of Rabbi Elazar ben Yehuda is the same, that all known possibilities of eating this teruma is taken into account. The rest of it has to be burned, so you're not left with kachin teruma with chametz on Yantiv. Amru, so they said, meaning that it was reported, that they concluded the discussion and took a halachic vote, and that until the halacha was established, like Rabbi Tzvi Fischer, who taught in the name of Rabbi Yeshua, that this is the halacha, that all teruma, even teruma, is going to be burnt at the end of the 4th hour on a regular year, and on Shabbos, the 14th is on Shabbos, on the 13th already. Every bit of teruma that can be consumed will be left for people that are going to eat it, and the rest, even teruma tahora, even a kosher teruma, is going to be burned with the chametz on Erev Yontif. My lava filalecha. Wouldn't you say that this seems that the halacha is also that in regards to eating, that you cannot eat teruma after the 4th hour, meaning that the halacha is not like Rabbi Gamliel. Amar Papa Mishmei Rava Leilavayr. Just means in regards to burning the chametz on the Erev Shabbos, and that even on teruma that is kosher, that is tahor, can also be burned. But as far as the halacha of whether or not a kohen can continue eating teruma on the 5th hour on an Erev Pesach, that was not a part of that conclusion. Rabbi also follows the opinion of Rabbi Nachman, which really is later, meaning but that Rabbi Nachman is in concurrence with Rabbi. Somebody had left a deposit with someone of a double sack of chametz. Etzel Yochanan Chakuka. He left it with this person named Yochanan Chakuka. Menakvu achbar. Mice had gotten to the sack, and now there was a hole at the bottom of the sack. Chametz was seeping out. Ubalafnei Rebbe, and he came. It was the morning of Erev Pesach, and he came to Rabbi Yehuda Nasidi, the compiler of the Mishnah, and he said, "What should I do with this? I'd like to sell it in the market because soon we're gonna have to burn it, and I can't take care of it, and I can't save it for it's a problem of chametz coming out of it. So I have to get rid of it. What should I do?" So the first hour of the day, he said, wait, maybe the owner of that sack is going to come and he was going to make something out of it. Amalei Hamtin, he said, wait, Shni Amalei Hamtin, second hour, same thing. Shlishas Amalei Hamtin, same thing. Wait, Revias Amalei Hamtin, the fourth hour, still, it's the end of eating chametz. He still said Hamtin, wait, Chamishis, when the fifth hour came, at which point, this is the last hour he'll be able to sell it in the market. Amalei Tzei Machro Leshuk. Go and sell it in the market, see what you can get for it. And that money is what you're going to give back to the person who deposited it. Because once the end of that hour comes, it is no longer, it's going to be a total loss to the original homeowner, the original owner of these sacks. My lav lenachrim. Wouldn't you say that Rebbe said sell it to non-Jews in the market in the last hour? And so that indicates that the last hour, nobody can consume it. Rabbi Yehuda. And that's like Rabbi Yehuda says at the end of the fourth hour, it's prohibited. Rav Yosef says, no, maybe it means to Jews. And Rabbi Meir, like Rabbi Meir. So as we've seen before, Rav Yosef got ill and he forgot some of his teachings, and his students would remind him of the teachings. So over here, even though that he said that, no, this was Rebbe said to sell it to Jews, and that the Jews would still consume it for that last hour, the fifth hour. Later, the Gemara is going to say, no, actually, they will remind him that it was the other way around. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye said to him, Eli Yisrael. Abaye is a student of Rav Yosef, and usually the one to remind him. He said, Eli Yisrael nishkalei nafshei. Well, if that's the case, so why does he have to sell it in the market? Let him eat it himself, and he'll pay the fellow for whatever the value was. And where it says, no, Mishum Chashada. That doesn't look right. That looks like a chashad. That looks like he is taking something for himself that is not his. The Tanya, as we learned, Gabay Tzedakah, somebody who's a custodian of funds, somebody who is a manager of a charity. Now, it's the end of whatever the season is, and there are no poor people to give it to. Is allowed to give it to, even though that somebody doesn't qualify as a poor person, they can give it to the next needy people, and you can give it to other people. However, but it would look inappropriate and dishonest if they take any to themselves. So they can give it to other people, but they cannot take any for themselves. Similarly, a food bank doesn't have anybody to give it to. So it's the end of a season, or some food is going to go bad and they have leftover food. They cannot take it for themselves. They can give it to other people that don't fit the qualifications of receiving food from the Talmud, from the food kitchen, from the soup kitchen. But nevertheless, you cannot take it for yourself. They can sell it to others, but not to themselves. Mishum shenemar, as the Torah says, you'd have to be clean, not only from Hashem, meaning where Hashem knows that you're honest and not doing anything wrong, but also Yisrael. You have to the perception of impropriety, this perception of deception is also a problem. So to over here, this fellow didn't want to take it himself, so he's selling it in the market. So Rav Master said to Rav Yosef, "Beferishit Malon, say u'merchalan u'nachrim, Rabbi Yehuda." So Rav Master reminded Rav Yosef that you yourself had told us that the words Rebbe said was, "Say u'merchalan u'nachrim, go and sell it to non-Jews." And this is in concurrence with Rabbi Yehuda. That's the way you taught it to us. And they reminded him that indeed the Rebbe also said halach is like Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rav Yosef, Kaman also Hashmaita the Rebbe, Kamashim Gamliel. whose halacha is this like? This is like Rav Shimon Gamliel. This idea that you should sell off something that's in your possession. Really, if it's in your possession as a deposit, you have to hold on to it regardless of what happens to it. Your job is to just protect it, but you're not the custodian to take care of it. Nevertheless, if you know that it's going to cost more than the value of the item, and essentially the owner of this item is going to lose its value, you need to sell it so that they can maintain its value. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Hamafkid Peiros Eitz HaChaver. Somebody deposits produce with a friend. Even if they go bad, don't touch them. Even if they're going to totally spoil, that's not your job. Your job is to protect them and to maintain them and to keep it there, and that's it. Now you go to Beis Din and you sell them with a court order. You're going to sell these to maintain whatever value can be maintained. That's like returning a lost item. Didn't we say that in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, this idea is only if it's going to come to a loss? That in other words, that if the typical amount of loss it's exceeding the typical amount of loss of that kind of produce, that's when you sell it. That even the Chachamim are going to say that you sell it once it's going to exceed the typical loss. And over here, it's going to be lost entirely. So everybody would agree, not only Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, everybody would agree this halacha that when it's going to be a total loss, sell it off with Beis Din. Have Beis Din give you the court order to sell off somebody else's product, somebody else's property that's in your possession. And this way you'll be able to maintain some asset for them rather than it being a total loss. Over here also where Pesach is coming, this would be chametz in the possession of a Jew, which becomes prohibited in benefit and totally a total loss to the owner. And so therefore it makes sense that we would sell it off. Rabbi Yehuda further said that in the Beis HaMikdash they had two breads from Toda breads that were on these platforms. So the Gemara says, Tani Tana Kamed Rav Yehuda al Gava Yitztaba, that it was on the platform. That they would put these breads at the end of the time of eating, they would take one away. At the end of the time for burning, they would take another one away. If it's on the platform, nobody's going to see it. And it's like hiding these breads. Tani al Gag Yitztaba. Not on top of the platform, but on the roof of the platform. So the platform itself had a canopy, had some sort of cover, and on top of that is where they put these breads. It was a double layer of these platforms, these stav. It's where people would put their wares, and it was these double platforms. Tanya Nami. Indeed, we learned Harabai Stav Kafel Haya was a double layer of these stav, these platforms. Rabbi Yehuda Eimer Istavanis, that it was called Istavanis because Sinikris Stav Lefnim Stav. One platform, and within it another one. So the Mishnah said that they took invalid breads of Toda. So that the carbon Toda is an offering brought when somebody came through a difficulty, whether an illness or having traveled over the seas, come out of prison, etc. So they would bring a carbon Toda, and the Toda had 40 breads. And as opposed to almost all the carbonos, which had only non-chametz breads, as the Torah says that you're not allowed to bring any leavening, any bread onto the Mizbeach, the Toda had 4 sets of 10 breads. One of those sets was chametz. And so this would become invalid, obviously, from Pesach. So during Pesach, you couldn't bring a carbon Toda. The day of Pesach, the Gemara is going to explain On the 14th, you also couldn't bring a toda because you couldn't eat it most of the day, and you're not allowed to bring a carbon where most of the time that you're allowed to eat the carbon or the breads of the carbon cannot be eaten. So anybody coming up for the Aliyah L'Regel to bring the carbon Pesachim for the pilgrimage Aliyah L'Regel and is obligated in a toda would bring them on the 13th. So there were an enormous amount of breads to be eaten for the carbon toda. And so some of them would become invalid because it was too much to consume. So amai psulas, why would they bring these invalid breads? Amar Rav Chanina, mitach shahim merubos nifsalas belina. Since there were so many that were brought on the 13th, by the time the 14th came, there were breads that were left overnight that had not been consumed, and there were plenty of them, so they would use some of those to indicate when the time for chametz was for consumption of chametz and burning chametz ended. Tani we learned. You can't bring a toda offering on Pesach because one of the sets of 10 breads is chametz, so you can't bring them. So anyone says pshita, that seems pretty obvious, right? You can't bring chametz on Pesach. So it doesn't only mean you can't bring it on Pesach, but you can't even bring it the day the carbon Pesach is brought, meaning the 14th. You can't bring it either. Why? You can't bring a carbon that is eventually going to go and become invalid. And since if you bring it in the morning of the 14th, you bring a carbon toda, you have 40 of these breads that have to be consumed in just hours, and so it's technically not going to be done, and so it's going to come to a psul. But everybody agrees that on the 13th you're allowed to bring it, and so everybody would bring it. Everybody coming up for the pilgrimage, for the Aliyah L'Regel, to bring their carbon Pesach that owed a toda would bring it. Because there were so many nifsalos belina, so some of them would be left overnight and become invalid as a carbon that's left overnight to the morning. However, Mishum Rabbi Yanai Amr Ksheirosam. However, Rabbi Yanai says that actually they were kosher. They were still valid. But why is it considered invalid? These are types that the carbon became, the carbon itself was not shechted for it. So these 40 breads that were donated, they were dedicated as a bread for a carbon toda, but they only become sanctified themselves, meaning not just as an asset of kachim, but also itself is kadosh, it itself becomes holy once the carbon is shechted. And that's when the name of kedusha applies to the breads itself. And so these breads would not have become invalidated by the morning because the carbon was never brought. And so it never made itself, it never became kaddish itself. And so it never became edible. The nishrat, so the Gemara says, so why is it called invalid? The carbon was never brought for it. And so the breads become holy with the animal that's brought when it's shechted. And this never happened. So the Gemara says, okay, so v'nishchat. So why are we destroying this bread? Just bring the carbon. So it's talking about where the carbon was, the animal that was brought with it was lost, and that's why it's invalid. Well, you can bring another animal for it, and let's shecht it. So, and that would be true. Then the halacha is that you can bring a new carbon for the breads, but you can't bring new breads for the carbon. No, he already said this is the carbon, this is the animal, my toda, and this is its bread. So once this animal is there, this dedication of this bread is connected to that animal. He can't bring another animal with it. The Kedarabba, like Rabba said, Amar Rabba, Avad alechem, mevi lechem achem. Generally, we say if the bread is lost, you can bring more bread, different breads, because the main part of the carbon is the animal, and so you can replace the breads. However, of the toda, if the animal gets lost, emevi toda acheres. You cannot bring another animal for these breads. And what's the reason? My timer, lechem glal toda. The breads are coming to accompany the carbon toda, the carbon itself, the animal. So therefore, if you lose the breads, just bring another accompanying set of breads. However, but because you have breads, you can't bring it. The animal's not coming to accompany the breads. So now, if you're left with breads because you lost the animal, you can't bring another animal as that dedication. So Gemara says, so let's just redeem it onto coins, and then it becomes non-hekdesh breads, and then I can buy new breads. So the Gemara says, you're right. Therefore, the case is not that it was kosher breads, and the animal, the toda animal that was going to be brought was lost, but rather the animal was shechted, and in the beginning process of the toda began, and it was proper. However, nishbach adam, but the blood got spilt, and so they couldn't spritz any of the blood on the mizbeach. And a part of the toda process is that in order, before you can eat the bread, you have to have the kohen have to have spritzed the blood onto the mizbeach, onto the altar. And here, where the blood got lost, got spilled out, so that can't be done. And it doesn't require burning yet, but nevertheless, you're not allowed to eat it, and it has to go bad. And you have to wait until it rots before you can use it, before you can burn it. V'nishbach adam kaman and karebi, and this is the opinion of Rebbe. Rebbe said, "Shnei dvarim hamatirim malin zebelezeh." That Rebbe said that two items. That, in other words, if something has two requirements, like over here, where there is an obligation of both shechting the animal and spritzing the blood on the mizbeach, and if you only had one, the other one wasn't done. It brings it up to a level of kedusha. So these breads are now sanctified. They are themselves a part of a carbon. However, it's not complete. So it cannot be an invalid carbon itself yet that gets burnt, because it's still valid bread. But it still cannot be completed because the bloods are not spritzed on the mizbeach. So you have to let it rot, and only then can you destroy it. The time we learned kivsi atzeres. We have a similar type of thing to these chametz. The other time where you have chametz breads are the two wheat breads that come on Shavuos, on the holiday of Shavuos, on the Chag. They bring the lambs of the Chag together with two wheat breads. So kivsi atzeres, the lambs of the Yantiv, emakachem esalechem ela b'shchita. It's the shechting of the carbon that will sanctify the breads. Ketzad. How's that? Shachtan lishman. If the intent was correct, that when they shechted the carbon, they shechted it with the correct intent that these are the lambs for carbon Pesach, for carbon of the Shavuos, for the Shavuos holiday. V'zarak daman lishman, and also the spritzing of the blood was done correctly. Kiddush alechem. Then the breads are sanctified. However, if both of them were done invalid, shachtan shalei lishman, he didn't have the correct intent when he shechted it. V'zarak daman shalei lishman, or the spritzing of the blood was without the correct intent. Like kiddush alechem, the breads, these two breads were not sanctified. However, shachtan lishman v'zarak daman shalei lishman, if he shechted it, the carbon with the correct intent, this is the Shavuos carbon. However, the one who spritzed it on the mizbeach forgot and thought some other carbon or some other thing when they did it, lechem kaddish ve'ne kaddish. So the breads are in between. They're sanctified because the shechting was done, but the spritzing was done invalid, and so therefore they're not sanctified, and so you can't burn them, but you also cannot eat them, and so you have to wait until they lose their structure. They rot. Divrei Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, however, Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, he says, no, it's not sanctified at all until the spritzing is complete and done correctly. So Gemara says, here too, we could also be concurring with Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, that it was already accepted in a vessel. So the reception of the blood was in a vessel. And Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon follows his father's opinion. Rabbi Shimon, the Amar, kala oimid lizrek kazarak dami. Since it's already received in a vessel, it says if it was able to be spritzed on the mizbeach, and it counts as if it was spritzed on the mizbeach. And so therefore, it's valid enough that it became sanctified, but it's not valid enough that you can eat it because it actually wasn't spritzed on the Mizbeach, and therefore these are the breads that were put onto the platform on Erev Pesach to tell us when the time of Chametz was over. And Matzah Shabbos, Bez Hashem, will do the last few lines before the Mishnah to the other opinions of what was done as a symbol for when the time of Chametz ended, and then we'll start the new subjects of Tumah Tahara for 1 week. Fascinating, but not so easy.